Welcome back. What separates a quiet legal victory from a public collapse is almost always the same thing: preparation that began long before anyone knew there was a war. This protagonist didn't fight back loudly. She built a case file while her boss was still celebrating. That discipline is worth studying. Welcome to Eternal Diary. The smell of the termination room was the first thing Nadia Reeves registered. Not the words. Not the HR script being read aloud like a eulogy for someone still breathing. The smell. Industrial cleaner and something burnt, like a microwave left running too long, embedded itself into her brainstem, the way smells always do during moments the body recognizes as significant before the mind catches up. Conference Room B on the 14th floor of the Ashford and Pelham Group building in downtown Chicago smelled like institutional maintenance and barely concealed panic. The kind of panic that wears a blazer. Nadia sat across from two people: Marcus Teal, the head of human resources, whose left eye had developed a faint involuntary twitch in the last 3 minutes, and Carolyn Voss, vice president of marketing, who had arranged her hands in her lap with the careful symmetry of someone who had practiced this particular posture in front of a mirror. On the table between them sat a manila folder. A single glass of water had been placed in front of Nadia's chair. She hadn't touched it. As of today, your position as senior brand strategist is being eliminated as part of a company-wide restructuring initiative, Marcus said, reading from a prepared statement that he held slightly above eye level, so he would not have to make direct contact with Nadia's face. Your final paycheck, inclusive of any accrued vacation time, will be processed within 48 hours. We'd like you to return your badge and laptop before leaving the building today. Severance details are outlined in the packet. He pushed the manila folder forward 2 inches. Nadia did not reach for it. She looked at Carolyn. Carolyn was wearing the gray blazer she reserved for what she privately called difficult conversations, which was how she described any conversation that required her to look someone in the eye while doing something that would devastate them. Nadia had noticed the blazer pattern over the course of 4 years. The gray blazer had appeared the day Marcus Torres in the analytics department was let go. It had appeared the afternoon Carolyn told Lauren Yee she would not be advancing to a director role, despite 2 consecutive years of exceeding her performance metrics. It had appeared last March when Carolyn told Nadia that the raise she had formally requested and substantiated with a 40-page market salary analysis would not be possible at this time due to budget constraints. A statement Nadia would later learn was made during the same fiscal quarter in which Carolyn approved a 15% salary increase for Derek Paulson, who had joined the team 11 months prior and had never run a campaign that cleared 7 figures in net impact. The gray blazer was Carolyn's armor against accountability. Nadia looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked at Marcus. "My position is being eliminated," she said. Not a question. A repeat. The kind you perform when you need a person to hear themselves. "That's correct," Marcus said. "The senior brand strategist role, as it has been structured, will not exist following this restructuring. We appreciate your significant contributions over the past 4 years, Nadia said. 4 years, Marcus agreed, with the weary automaticity of a man who understood he was in a room where nothing he said was going to feel adequate. Your work has been genuinely valued, and we wish you the very best going forward." Nadia turned back to Carolyn. "Is there anything you'd like to add?" Carolyn's hands tightened in her lap. A micro-movement, the kind you only catch if you've spent 4 years in the same room as someone and learned the precise topography of their discomfort. "I think Marcus has covered everything. I'm sorry this is difficult, Nadia. These decisions are never easy." Nadia nodded once. She picked up the manila folder. She stood. She did not shake anyone's hand. She walked out of Conference Room B and down the corridor to her office, where she spent 19 minutes packing the personal effects from her desk into a canvas tote bag she had kept in her bottom drawer for reasons she could not, until this moment, consciously articulate. She dropped her badge into the gray plastic tray at the security desk in the lobby. She handed her laptop to the building's compliance officer with a signed receipt. She walked out through the revolving glass door into the October air on South Michigan Avenue, which hit her face like cold water thrown from a window above. She did not cry. She stood on the sidewalk and let 11 seconds pass. Then she opened the notes application on her personal phone. not her work phone, which was still in her canvas bag, having been overlooked in the inventory check. And she began to type. October 14th. Terminated at 10:22 a.m. in Conference Room B. Marcus Teal and Carolyn Voss present. Stated reason: position elimination/restructuring. Gray blazer. Marcus had notes. Water glass. Neither shook my hand. Severance packet. She typed for 2 minutes. Then she put her phone in her coat pocket and walked 3 blocks north to the coffee shop on the corner of Monroe and Wabash, sat at a table by the window, ordered a black coffee from a woman with paint on her wrist, and opened the severance packet. It was, she noted, a remarkably thin document for 4 years of someone's professional life. Nadia Reeves had been born in Atlanta, the youngest child of a woman who cleaned office buildings overnight, and a man who repaired elevators for a regional contracting company. She had not grown up with the language of wealth, but she had grown up with the language of systems, how they were built, who they were built for, and where the gaps existed for someone willing to learn the architecture from the outside rather than the inside. She had put herself through DePaul University's business program on a combination of scholarships, work study, and 3 part-time jobs that occasionally overlapped in scheduling in ways that required her to eat breakfast at 11 p.m. She had graduated with a 3.9 GPA and a minor in communications, and she had taken a junior coordinator role at a mid-sized agency at 23, where she had spent 2 years learning everything the senior strategists were not interested in teaching her. She was not a person who had arrived at Ashford and Pelham through connections. She had arrived through a cold application, a first-round interview that lasted 45 minutes longer than scheduled because she had come prepared with a 20-slide analysis of the company's existing brand positioning gaps and a proposed 18-month correction strategy. She had been offered the role at a salary she had negotiated up by $8,000 before accepting. She was, by every measurable standard, good at her job. Not good in the way that gets praised in all-hands meetings. Good in the specific, unglamorous way that means a campaign you built from a brief that arrived on a Friday afternoon with no budget line and 2 weeks to launch still closes at a 12% above projected engagement rate, and nobody remembers who did the work except the person who did it. Carolyn Voss had hired her. Carolyn had also spent the better part of 4 years managing Nadia in a manner that Nadia had observed with increasing precision, but had not, until recently, begun cataloging in the structured way it deserved. The first entry in what Nadia would later simply call the record was dated 14 months earlier. Not because that was when she had first noticed the pattern, but because that was when she had first understood that what she was noticing was not ambient professional friction or the normal static of a demanding workplace. It was something more deliberate, more directed. And if it was deliberate and directed, it was documentable. 14 months ago, Nadia had pitched a campaign concept for the company's new sustainable accessories line. The concept, a community-led narrative series titled Made for Keeps, had been developed over 3 weeks, presented in a 90-minute meeting to Carolyn and 2 senior members of the product team, and received enthusiastically. Carolyn had said verbatim, "This is exactly the direction we need. Let's get it into development." 10 days later, Nadia had received an email from Carolyn's assistant, informing her that the Made for Keeps concept would be moving forward under the creative direction of the brand development team, led by Derek Paulson. Nadia had requested a clarifying conversation. Carolyn had responded that the handoff was a structural decision, and that Nadia's contributions to the initial concept were foundational. The campaign launched 7 months later under Derek's name. It performed well. Derek received a public commendation from the CEO, Richard Ashford, at the company's annual marketing review. Nadia's name appeared nowhere in the attribution documentation. She had written this down at the time. Dates, names, emails, the specific language Carolyn had used. She had stored it in a folder on her personal laptop titled Reference, Professional Development Notes, which was the most boring possible label for a document she had instinctively known, even then, might one day need to be unremarkable enough that no one would look at it twice. 14 months. She had been building this record for 14 months. Now, sitting at a table by the window of a coffee shop with paint on the walls and a jazz recording playing low from a speaker that was probably not expensive enough for the room, Nadia read the severance packet from the first page to the last, without skipping anything. The severance offer was 6 weeks of base pay. She read the release clause on page 4. By signing, she would be releasing Ashford and Pelham Group and all its officers, directors, and employees from any and all claims related to her employment or its termination, including, but not limited to, claims under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, the Illinois Human Rights Act, the Equal Pay Act, and any other applicable federal, state, or local statutes. She read it twice, then she set the packet down and picked up her coffee and looked out the window at the stream of people moving along Monroe Street, in their coats and their headphones and their private interior lives. In the severance packet, buried on page 7 in a font size that was technically legal but practically unkind, was a signing deadline. She had 21 days to sign and return. She had 21 days. She finished her coffee. She left $3 on the table for the woman with paint on her wrist. She walked out into the October air and called her sister in Atlanta and talked to her for 11 minutes about nothing in particular. Then she hung up and pulled up the contact information she had saved 8 months ago for an employment attorney named Priya Shannon, whose name she had first encountered in an article in the Chicago Tribune about a workplace discrimination verdict in which a mid-level manager at a logistics company had been awarded $1.4 million for systematic promotional discrimination against Black women in her division. Priya Shannon had been the lead attorney on that case. Nadia had saved the article to her phone under a folder titled Industry News. She called the number. Priya Shannon's office was on the 17th floor of a building on Wacker Drive that had a lobby with a cracked tile near the second elevator bank that no one had ever replaced, and a reception area that smelled like coffee that had been reheated too many times. Priya herself was a small woman in her mid-40s, with an exactness to her movements that suggested someone who had spent decades operating in rooms where imprecision was expensive. She had dark hair with a single white streak near her left temple that she made no effort to conceal, and she wore reading glasses that she took off and put on with a frequency that seemed tied to the intensity of whatever she was currently considering. Nadia had arrived 20 minutes early. She had brought with her a paper folder and a flash drive. "Tell me what happened," Priya said, after the introductions and the coffee that Nadia accepted out of social reflex and did not drink. "And then tell me what you brought with you, because the fact that you're carrying a flash drive to an intake meeting tells me you've been thinking about this for longer than today." 14 months, Nadia said. Priya put her glasses on. "Go ahead." Nadia talked for 40 minutes. She did not editorialize. She did not perform a motion. She presented the pattern as she had documented it, chronologically, with specificity, with dates and names and direct quotes where she had them, and paraphrases with context markers where she did not. She described the Made for Keeps campaign appropriation. She described the raise denial and the simultaneous salary increase for Derek Paulson. She described 3 instances over the past 2 years in which she had submitted formal project proposals through the internal system and received no response, while substantively similar proposals submitted by white colleagues within the same time window had been greenlit within 10 business days. She described a department review meeting in April in which Carolyn had interrupted her 3 times in the space of 22 minutes, while allowing Derek and James Willett, who had joined the team 8 months ago, to complete their presentations without a single interjection. She described being the only Black woman at the senior strategist level in the entire marketing division of a company with over 600 employees. She described Haley Brandt. Priya's pen stopped moving. "Who is Haley Brandt?" "Carolyn's mentee," Nadia said. "She's been introduced internally as a brand innovation specialist. The title didn't exist before last month. The job description, which I was able to pull from the internal HR portal before my access was revoked this morning," she opened her folder and extracted a printed page, "maps almost exactly to the senior brand strategist role I held for 4 years, with the exception of 2 responsibilities that appear to have been removed and 2 that appear to have been added, both additions being things that were in Haley's portfolio from her previous job, not things that were structurally necessary for the role." Priya picked up the printed page and read it. "Haley Brandt," Nadia continued, "is 27. She has 3 years of professional experience. She graduated from the same university as Carolyn Voss. I confirmed this from LinkedIn and from a piece in the company newsletter last spring, in which Carolyn mentioned alumni connections as the source of a great new addition to the team. Priya set the page down. She took her glasses off. She looked at Nadia directly for a moment. You pulled the job description from the internal portal this morning. Before my access was revoked. Nadia confirmed. My network token was still active until approximately 11:40. I printed it at the Kinko's on Wacker at noon. Priya was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What's on the flash drive?" Emails, internal performance review documentation. I had copies from each annual cycle because I was provided hard copies as part of the review process. Meeting notes I took contemporaneously. The salary analysis I submitted with my raise request, which includes market comparables I sourced from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Marketing Week annual compensation survey, and 3 industry-specific salary transparency databases. My employment contract. The original job posting I applied to, which I saved at the time, a screenshot of Derek Paulson's LinkedIn that shows his title and promotion timeline, and a log. A log? 112 entries. Dated, specific, covering the past 14 months. Priya put her glasses back on. She was quiet for approximately 5 seconds. Then she said, "Did you sign the severance agreement?" "No." "Good. Don't. Not yet." She picked up her pen again. "Walk me through the log." What Nadia had built over 14 months was less a diary than an architectural document. She had not recorded feelings. She had recorded facts. The distinction was something she had understood instinctively, the way people who grow up learning to navigate systems that were not built for them develop a kind of practical instinct for what survives scrutiny and what doesn't. A feeling does not survive a deposition. A date, a quote, a named witness, and a contemporaneous record does. Entry 17. March 3rd. Weekly Team Sync. CV, Carolyn Voss, distributed the Q2 campaign brief to all attending members. My copy was missing the budget allocation appendix that I later confirmed was included in the copies received by DP, Derek Paulson, and JW, James Willett. When I flagged the omission, CV stated the omission was a printing error. I confirmed with the administrative assistant the following day that only 1 copy was printed without the appendix. Entry 31. April 18th. Annual Performance Review. CV stated my overall rating as meets expectations. In the prior 2 years, my rating had been exceeds expectations. No specific performance deficiencies were cited. When I requested specific examples of areas where my work had not met expectations, CV stated that the rating reflected the competitive benchmark and that expectations had evolved. No documentation was provided. I submitted a written request for clarification the following Monday, referencing the company's stated performance review protocols. I received no written response. Entry 54. June 9th. I submitted a campaign proposal for the Fall/Winter Retail Partnership Initiative through the internal project management system, project ID 2024-MKT-114. My submission was marked as under review for 31 days before being closed with no explanation. 2 weeks after my submission was closed, a substantially similar initiative was approved under the project management system as project ID 2024-MKT-127, submitted by DP. I documented both project descriptions via screenshot. Entry 88. August 22nd. Company all-hands meeting. Richard Ashford publicly recognized the brand team for a Q2 performance milestone. He named DP, JW, and the innovative work being done on the new product line, without naming me. I led the product line campaign. This was the 3rd consecutive all-hands in which work I led was attributed either to the team generally or to specific named male colleagues. Entry 109. September 30th. I became aware through a conversation with Gemma Coro, a colleague in the Content Strategy Division, that Carolyn Voss had approved Haley Brandt's start date of October 28th. Gem mentioned this casually, unaware of its significance. I noted it. I pulled the internal job posting the following day. Priya read the log in full. She read it the way lawyers read things, which is differently from how other people read things, with a quality of attention that is simultaneously comprehensive and selective, tracking the weight of specific words, the implications of specific dates, the structural significance of patterns across a long chronology. When she finished, she set the log down and looked at Nadia over the rim of her glasses. "You have something here," she said. "I know," Nadia said. "That's not a guarantee of anything. Employment discrimination cases are hard. Juries don't always—" "I know," Nadia said again. "Walk me through the legal theory." Priya's expression shifted slightly. Something in it became more attentive. "You've done research." "Some." "What do you know?" Title VII of the Civil Rights Act prohibits discrimination in employment on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. It covers termination, compensation, promotion, and terms and conditions of employment. The Illinois Human Rights Act provides parallel protections at the state level, with a broader definition of covered characteristics. A disparate treatment claim requires me to establish a prima facie case, that I'm a member of a protected class, that I was qualified for my position, that I suffered an adverse employment action, and that the circumstances give rise to an inference of discrimination. If I establish the prima facie case, the burden shifts to the employer to articulate a legitimate, non-discriminatory reason for the action. If they provide one, the burden shifts back to me to show that the stated reason is a pretext. She paused. The restructuring is the pretext, especially if the position that replaced mine is functionally identical and occupied by a person with less experience and qualifications who shares the same racial background as Carolyn Voss and received the position through a personal connection rather than a competitive process. Priya looked at her for a moment. "You should have been a lawyer." "I considered it," Nadia said. "Tell me what you think about the salary data." The salary data was, in Priya's estimation, one of the 3 strongest elements of the case. Nadia's market analysis, prepared 14 months ago to support her raise request, had benchmarked her compensation against the median for senior brand strategists in the Chicago metro area using multiple independent sources. Her salary at the time of termination was approximately 14% below the median. Derek Paulson, who had joined the team at the senior strategist level 11 months after Nadia had been promoted to it, had been hired at a salary approximately 3% above the median, and had received the 15% increase that Carolyn had approved during the same period in which Nadia's raise request was denied. The Equal Pay Act would need sex discrimination, not just race. But Title VII covered both, and the salary differential between Nadia and her white male colleagues at the same level, when combined with the documented pattern of promotional exclusion, formed a picture. Pictures, Priya noted, were what juries responded to. The second strong element was the replacement. Haley Brandt's new title was different from Nadia's old one. Her job description had been modified, but the substantive work was the same. Campaign development, brand narrative strategy, external partnership management, and content oversight for the sustainable product line that Nadia had built from the initial brief. The modifications to the job description were, in Priya's reading, cosmetic. Thin. The kind of cosmetic that doesn't survive the comparison a jury makes when a plaintiff's attorney puts 2 documents on a screen side by side and says nothing for 5 seconds. The third element was the performance review record. Nadia had 4 years of performance reviews. The first 2 showed exceeds expectations ratings, with specific written commendations from Carolyn. The third showed a sudden drop to meets expectations, with no documented performance deficiencies and no written response to Nadia's formal request for clarification. The fourth, the final review, conducted 6 months before her termination, maintained the same rating, again with no specific deficiencies cited. While Carolyn's written comments included language like alignment challenges and team integration opportunities that was so vague it functioned as decoration rather than substance. The contrast between the first 2 reviews and the latter 2 created a question. What changed? The timing of the change coincided, with a precision that would be difficult for any jury to ignore, with the hiring of Derek Paulson and the period in which Nadia's project proposals began being systematically deprioritized. "What changed," Priya said, "is something the defense is going to have to explain. And their explanation, if they're smart, will be business needs evolved, expectations shifted. It wasn't personal. Which is exactly what Carolyn said to you verbally, which means it's the story they've already been preparing. Which is why the log matters, Nadia said. The log is contemporaneous documentation of a pattern. It's a rebuttal to the narrative that the performance shift was about business evolution. It shows consistent excellence in substantive work product, paired with a systematic reduction in recognition, attribution, access, and compensation. That's not business evolution. That's managed exclusion. Nadia picked up her coffee, which had gone cold. She drank it anyway. I want to know what the litigation timeline looks like, she said. And I want to know what discovery is going to surface. Priya took her glasses off and set them on the table. Discovery is where cases like this are won. What discovery is going to surface, if we file and they don't settle, is everything they don't want seen. Emails between Carolyn and Marcus about the restructuring, internal communications about Haley Brandt's hiring timeline, the full salary data for the entire marketing division, which will show us comparators. Any documentation of the performance review process, including whatever methodology Carolyn used to assign ratings. HR complaint records. If any other employees in the division have raised concerns formally, those become relevant. And any communications that reference Nadia Reeves in a context that reveals the actual reasoning behind these decisions. Carolyn is not careful with email, Nadia said. What do you mean? She uses email the way people use conversation, informally. She sent me emails at 11 at night with language I wouldn't put in a professional document. She treats the internal system like a private channel. She assumes no one reads it except the intended recipient. Priya looked at her steadily. You think there's something in those emails. I think there's nothing that requires intent to be discrimination. But I think that if you request internal communications between Carolyn Voss and Marcus Teal during the 12-month period prior to my termination, and between Carolyn and anyone involved in Haley Brandt's hire, you're going to find a story that nobody at Ashford and Pelham currently wants told. Priya was quiet for a moment. You understand this could take 18 months. It could take 2 years. It could settle 3 weeks before a trial date. It could go to trial and I understand the variables, Nadia said. What are you looking for? What does resolution look like to you? Nadia thought about this. Not because she didn't know the answer, but because she wanted to be precise about it. Financial compensation that reflects what was taken from me. The salary differential, the lost income from termination, the professional opportunity cost of 4 years in which my work was systematically undervalued and appropriated. Accountability that is documented. And I want them to know, specifically, that the log exists. That I have been keeping records since March of last year. I want the institutional knowledge of that to be part of whatever resolution occurs. I want Carolyn Voss to understand that the precision she thought was on her side was actually on mine. Priya Shannon looked at her for a long moment. I'll need the full log, all the documents on the flash drive, your employment contract, and a timeline we build together over the next 2 sessions, she said. Don't communicate with anyone at Ashford and Pelham directly. If they contact you, forward me everything immediately. Do not sign the severance agreement. If they follow up about it, tell them you're reviewing it with counsel. That's it. That's the only thing you say. Nadia nodded. And Nadia? Priya picked up her pen. The next time you're tempted to feel anything other than strategic about this, I need you to hold it somewhere else. Because what you've built in that folder is remarkable, and emotion, right now, is the only thing that can damage it. I know, Nadia said, for the 3rd time. She left the office at 5:47 and took the L home to the apartment on the north side where she had lived for 2 years, in a building with a buzzer that stuck in the cold and a window in the bedroom that rattled when the wind came off the lake at a particular angle. She made rice and lentils on the stove with the radio on low and ate standing at the counter, looking at the wall. She was 32 years old. She had $8,000 in savings and $412 in her checking account. She had a professional network that she was methodical about maintaining. She had a laptop that was personal, not company issued. She had a folder titled Reference, Professional Development Notes. She had a case. She washed the pot and the bowl and dried them and put them away and went to bed at 11 and lay in the dark for a while, listening to the window rattle. She did not feel triumphant. She did not feel righteous. She felt the particular cold clarity of someone who has identified the structure of a problem and understood with some precision how to dismantle it. She had been in that structure for 4 years. She had learned it from the inside. That was the thing Carolyn Voss had never understood, that the person you spend 4 years managing acquires, through proximity, a detailed map of every weakness in your decision-making. Every inconsistency, every habit, every room where you are not as careful as you believe you are. Carolyn had spent 4 years thinking Nadia was a resource she could direct. Nadia had spent 14 months understanding that Carolyn was a case she was building. The EEOC charge was filed 3 weeks after Nadia's termination, on a Thursday morning. Priya had walked her through the process in detail. The charge was the administrative prerequisite to filing a federal lawsuit under Title VII. The EEOC would issue a right to sue letter once the mandatory processing period had elapsed, which, depending on their caseload, could mean anywhere from several weeks to several months, though they could also request an early right to sue after 180 days. In parallel, they filed a complaint with the Illinois Department of Human Rights under the IHRL, which ran on a separate but compatible track. The charge document was specific. It named race and sex discrimination in the terms and conditions of employment, including compensation, promotional opportunity, attribution, and termination. It described the replacement of Nadia's role with a functionally identical position filled by a less qualified white employee through a personal connection. It described the contemporaneous salary increases for male colleagues during the period of her raise denial. It described the pattern of project appropriation and attribution exclusion. It was 47 pages. Ashford and Pelham's general counsel, a man named Lawrence Hughes, who had been with the company for 11 years and had the slightly glassy look of someone who had spent a decade managing small disputes and was now standing in front of something considerably larger, received the charge and called Priya's office within 4 business days. He said the company believed the charge was without merit. Priya said that was the company's prerogative to assert. He asked if there was any interest in an early resolution process. Priya said she would discuss that with her client. She called Nadia that afternoon. "They reached out." "Of course they did," Nadia said. "It doesn't mean they're ready to settle. It means they're assessing. They'll do an internal review of the documents they have, try to identify their exposure, and then decide whether they want to litigate or negotiate. The first number they put on the table will tell us a lot about how seriously they're taking what's in the charge. And if they decide to litigate, then we go to discovery and see what's in those emails." The right to sue letter arrived in 11 weeks. Priya filed the federal complaint in the Northern District of Illinois on a Tuesday morning. The case was assigned to Judge Patricia Wren, a 15-year veteran of the federal bench whose rulings in employment discrimination cases were, in Priya's reading, methodical and unsentimental. She did not favor either side by disposition. She favored precision. She favored clean records. Nadia's record was clean. Ashford and Pelham retained outside litigation counsel, a firm from the Loop with 4 employment defense specialists and a reputation for aggressive discovery strategy. The lead attorney assigned to the case was a man named Garrett Shea, who filed a motion to dismiss within 30 days of the complaint on the grounds that the restructuring constituted a legitimate, non-discriminatory business rationale and that the plaintiff had not adequately pled the elements of a prima facie case. Judge Wren denied the motion. In her written ruling, 2 pages long and briskly specific, she noted that the complaint had adequately alleged a pattern of discriminatory treatment, with sufficient particularity to survive a motion to dismiss, and that the question of whether the restructuring was pretextual was a factual matter to be resolved through discovery. Discovery began in January. The discovery requests Priya sent were comprehensive, in a manner that Garrett Shea's response, a letter to the court characterizing them as overbroad and disproportionate, suggested he found alarming. They requested all internal communications involving Carolyn Voss and Marcus Teal from the preceding 30 months. All internal communications referencing Haley Brandt's hiring, title creation, or salary determination. All salary and compensation records for the marketing division's professional staff for the preceding 5 years. All performance review documentation for all employees at or above the senior strategist level in marketing for the preceding 4 years. All project management records for the 20 campaigns and initiatives cited in the complaint, and all communications referencing Nadia Reeves in any context from any employee over the preceding 3 years. There was a protective order negotiated for the salary and HR records, which were designated confidential. The designation did not prevent Priya from using them in the case. It prevented public disclosure. The salary records were produced in February. Priya reviewed them the day they arrived. She called Nadia at 8:17 in the evening. "Are you somewhere you can look at a spreadsheet?" she said. Nadia was at her kitchen table. "Yes." Priya sent her a PDF. Nadia opened it and looked at it for 30 seconds. The marketing division's full compensation record for the preceding 5 years showed, with a clarity that required no interpretive work, that every employee at the senior strategist level who was not Nadia Reeves had been compensated at or above the market median established by the Bureau of Labor Statistics for the relevant period. Nadia's compensation had been below the median for every year of her employment. The gap had widened over time as others received increases. The widest gap, 18% below the median, had occurred during the year in which Carolyn had denied her formal raise request. Derek Paulson's salary was in the record. His starting salary had been higher than Nadia's current salary at the time of his hire, despite entering the role with less experience and a thinner project portfolio. James Willette's salary was in the record. He had been hired 6 months after Derek, also at above median compensation, also with less experience in the specific domain than Nadia held. Neither Derek nor James was black. Neither Derek nor James was a woman. The record also showed in a column labeled Merit Increase FY 2023 a notation next to Nadia's name that said 0.00. The notation next to Derek's name said 15.00. The notation next to James's name said 8.50. The approval signature on the merit increase column was Carolyn Voss's. "She signed it," Nadia said. "She signed it," Priya confirmed. "And the merit increase column has a field for justification?" "It does. The field next to Nadia Reeves's 0 says budget constraints. The field next to Derek Paulson's 15 says exceptional contribution to Q2 product launch." Nadia was quiet for a moment. "The Q2 product launch. I ran the Q2 product launch campaign." "I know. That's in your log. Entry 51. So the justification she used to give him a 15% merit increase was a campaign that I led? That is what the documentation currently shows?" "Yes." Nadia put her hand flat on the table. It was cold against her palm. She held it there for a moment. "What does Garrett Shea know about this record?" "He produced it. His team produced it. So, yes, he's seen it. What he doesn't know yet is how we're going to use it. The deposition is in 6 weeks. That's where we're going to lock this in." The deposition of Carolyn Voss was scheduled for a Wednesday in March at the offices of Ashford and Pelham's outside counsel on the 32nd floor of a building on Michigan Avenue with a view of the lake and a conference room that had been set up with the specific aesthetic neutrality of a room that wants everyone to feel equally uncomfortable. Priya and Nadia arrived together. Nadia sat beside Priya as a silent presence. She was not conducting the deposition, but she had requested to be present, and the defense had agreed, because excluding a plaintiff from a witness deposition in their own case was the kind of procedural aggression that reads poorly. Carolyn arrived with Garrett Shea and a junior associate who spent the duration of the deposition taking notes at a speed that suggested he understood he was watching something with legal consequences. Carolyn was wearing the gray blazer. Nadia noticed this with something that was close to neutral. She wrote nothing down. She folded her hands on the table and looked at the space between them. Priya opened with background questions, methodical and unremarkable. Carolyn's tenure at the company, her role, her responsibilities, how performance reviews were conducted, what criteria were used, how the merit increase process worked. Carolyn answered with the practiced fluency of someone who had been prepared carefully. Short, factually correct answers that volunteered nothing. Then Priya opened the merit increase document. She placed a physical copy in front of Carolyn and introduced it as Exhibit 14. She asked Carolyn to confirm that the document was the marketing division's merit increase authorization record for fiscal year 2023. Carolyn confirmed it. Priya asked her to confirm that the signature on the approval column was Carolyn's. Carolyn confirmed it. Priya asked her to read the justification field for Derek Paulson's 15% increase. Carolyn read, "Exceptional contribution to Q2 product launch." Priya asked her to describe Derek Paulson's specific contributions to the Q2 product launch. Garrett Shea objected, "Calls for narrative." Priya rephrased. Carolyn answered with a response about Derek's team leadership and execution oversight that was vague in a specific way. Vague in the way that things are when their foundation is not solid. Priya then introduced Exhibit 23, which was a project management record from the internal system, showing that the Q2 product launch, officially designated MKT-2023-Q2-PL, had been assigned to Nadia Reeves as lead strategist. Priya asked Carolyn to confirm that the project lead on the record was Nadia Reeves. Carolyn looked at the document. A pause, brief, controlled. Yes. And Derek Paulson's role on that project? He provided support. What kind of support? He assisted with execution. Can you point me to any document, internal email, project system notation, meeting minutes, deliverable assignment, that shows Derek Paulson's specific role in the Q2 product launch? Carolyn looked at Garrett. Garrett did not respond. He had no grounds to object to the question. I would have to review records, Carolyn said. I've reviewed the records, Priya said. I'll represent to you that in the project management system, in the email communications produced in Discovery, and in the meeting records from the Q2 launch period, Derek Paulson does not appear as a substantive contributor to any of the key deliverables. Nadia Reeves appears in all of them. Are you aware of any other documentation that would show Mr. Paulson's contributions? There may be verbal communications that wouldn't appear in the system. Verbal communications for which there's no written record? That's possible. So when you wrote exceptional contribution to Q2 product launch as the justification for Mr. Paulson's 15% merit increase, you were referring to contributions that you cannot point to in any written record we've produced, or that you have produced. Garrett Shea said, Objection! Mischaracterizes the testimony. Priya said, I'll rephrase. Based on the documentation available in this case, can you identify a single written record that shows Derek Paulson making a substantive, project-leading contribution to the Q2 product launch? Silence. A silence that lasted 4 seconds and will have lasted in the transcript 4 seconds forever. Not specifically, no, Carolyn said. Priya moved to Exhibit 31. This was a printed email produced in Discovery, dated September 12th of the prior year. It was an email from Carolyn to Marcus Teal, sent at 9:47 p.m. on a Thursday. The subject line was, Re-Q4 Planning, Team Structure. Priya placed it in front of Carolyn and asked her to confirm that she had sent it. Carolyn read it. Something changed in her posture. A fractional degree. The kind of change a person who has spent 4 years in the same room as someone might notice. She confirmed she had sent it. Priya asked her to read the second paragraph of the email aloud. There was a brief consultation between Carolyn and Garrett at a volume below what the court reporter could capture, after which Garrett said there was no legal basis to prevent his client from reading a document produced in Discovery, and Carolyn read, I think the restructuring is the cleanest path. Haley is ready, she understands what I need, and she'll be easier to work with. I don't want to spend another year managing the situation we have. It's not efficient, and the team dynamics aren't working. Priya waited a beat after the reading finished. When you say the situation we have, what are you referring to? I was referring to general team dynamics. Which specific team dynamics? The team had been experiencing some friction. With whom? Garrett objected. Calls for speculation. Judge Wren, who was not present, this was a deposition, not a trial, but whose rulings on Discovery disputes had been consistently clear, had already indicated in a pre-deposition order that witness testimony about the identities of individuals referenced in communications was fair game. Priya noted this. Carolyn said, There had been some friction with Nadia. What was the nature of that friction? She had strong opinions about how projects should be run. Strong opinions that you had characterized, in her first 2 performance reviews, as leadership initiative and strategic ownership. Priya slid Exhibit 7 and Exhibit 8 The first two annual performance reviews, across the table. In fiscal year 2021, you wrote, and I'm quoting from Exhibit 7, that Ms. Reeves demonstrates exceptional ownership of her project portfolio and consistently drives outcomes above expectation. In fiscal year 2022, Exhibit 8, you wrote that her strategic thinking and initiative are among the strongest I've seen at this level. Are those your words? Yes. What changed between fiscal year 2022 and fiscal year 2023? Expectations evolved. The expectations evolved. And during the same period in which expectations evolved, you hired 2 new male employees at above median compensation. You denied Ms. Reeves's documented raise request, citing budget constraints, and you approved a 15% merit increase for one of those male employees, with a written justification that your own contemporaneous records do not support. Is that a fair characterization of events? Garrett Shea's objection came before she finished the question.
Compound question.
Argumentative. Priya withdrew and rephrased into 4 separate questions. She got 4 separate answers that, placed side by side in a transcript, told the same story as the compound version. The deposition lasted 6 hours. At the end of it, Carolyn Voss looked smaller than she had at the beginning, in the specific way that people look smaller when the architecture of a narrative they've been living inside has been publicly examined and found structurally unsound. In the elevator going down, Nadia stood beside Priya and looked at the numbers descending on the panel. She said nothing. In the lobby, Priya said, "They'll want to talk." "I know," Nadia said. "It'll happen fast. Before the transcript is officially certified, probably." "How fast?" "A week? Maybe less." It was 3 days. Garrett Shea called Priya's direct line on a Saturday morning and suggested an informal conversation about resolution. Priya called Nadia immediately after. They had a strategy session that afternoon in Priya's office. Priya laid out the landscape. Ashford and Pelham had exposure on multiple fronts. The salary record alone was a clean Equal Pay Act and Title VII claim with quantifiable damages. The salary differential over 4 years, with back pay, represented a specific and documentable number. The termination and replacement were a second claim. The project appropriation pattern, while harder to quantify precisely, was corroborative evidence of a system rather than isolated incidents, which elevated the claim toward the kind of pattern or practice discrimination that supported enhanced damages. And the email. The September email from Carolyn to Marcus about Haley being easier to work with and the situation she didn't want to manage was the kind of document that human beings on a jury look at and understand immediately, regardless of how many technical objections surround it. "They're afraid of the email," Nadia said. "They're afraid of the email in front of a jury," Priya said. "In a conference room, they can contextualize it. In a courtroom, with a plaintiff sitting 20 feet away, it says what it says." "What's our number?" Priya had done the calculation across 3 scenarios. A conservative reading of back pay and front pay based on the salary differential and projected lost income through a reasonable employment recovery period, a mid-range reading that included compensatory damages for emotional distress and reputational injury, and a higher reading that incorporated the potential for punitive damages if the jury found that the conduct was willful or reckless. The range was wide. The mid-range number, which Priya considered the most defensible and the most likely target for a negotiated resolution, was between $1.5 and $2.5 million. "We open at 2.5, Nadia said. Priya looked at her. "You've thought about this?" "I've had time." The mediation was scheduled for April. A retired federal judge named Theodore Alvarez presided. The session lasted 9 hours across 2 conference rooms in a building on Lakeshore Drive, where someone had placed fresh flowers in the reception area that had nothing to do with anyone's comfort, and everything to do with the visual language of an institution that takes itself seriously. Priya presented the case. She was methodical and unspectacular in her presentation, which was a choice. Spectacle in mediation signals weakness, because it suggests the presenter needs the room's emotion rather than its reason. She walked through the timeline, the salary data, the performance record contrast, the project appropriation documentation, and the email. She presented the damages calculation in 3 tiers, framing the mid-range as the rational settlement point. Garrett Shea presented the defense's position, which was that the restructuring was a legitimate business decision, that the performance shift was documented, that the salary differential was within acceptable range given individual negotiation outcomes, and that the email was being taken out of context. Theodore Alvarez sent both teams to their separate rooms and began the shuttle diplomacy that mediation is. The first number from the defense was $400,000. Nadia heard it through Priya's report and said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "Tell them we'll see them at trial." The counteroffer came 2 hours later, $800,000. Priya presented it. Nadia sat with it for a few seconds. No. They're moving. They went from 400 to 8 in 2 hours. That's not nothing. It's also not 2 million. What's your number? 2 million. Flat. No confidentiality clause that restricts me from discussing the general nature of the resolution. And a written acknowledgement in the settlement agreement that the company is taking corrective action regarding its compensation and promotion practices, which they will have to document. Priya looked at her. The corrective action acknowledgement is unusual. It's also not nothing, Nadia said. Priya went back to the room. The shuttle continued for 3 more hours. The defense moved to 900,000, then to 1.2, then to 1.5. At 1.5, Garrett Shea indicated verbally to Theodore Alvarez that this was approaching the company's maximum authority for the day, which Alvarez reported to Priya with the neutral affect of a man who has spent 30 years watching people perform certainty they do not feel. Priya came back to Nadia. 1.5. Nadia looked at the table. A scratch on the surface of it. A thin diagonal mark had been in her peripheral vision for the past 4 hours. She looked at it directly for a moment. What do we lose at trial that we don't lose here? She asked. Time, money. Litigation is expensive, and even on contingency, the costs are real. The uncertainty of a jury, and there's always a risk with the email. They're going to argue hard that easier to work with and the situation are race-neutral language. A sympathetic jury might buy it. It's not my read, but it's a possibility. What do we gain? The full range. If the jury comes back hard on punitive damages, we're potentially looking at 2 million or above. We could also get a public verdict, which the settlement won't give us. And the corrective action acknowledgement you want? That's harder to enforce in a settlement than it sounds. But a consent decree from a judge carries actual legal weight. Nadia looked at the scratch on the table for another moment. Go back in and tell them 2 million. Tell them the corrective action acknowledgement is not a negotiating point. Tell them if we don't have an agreement today at 2 million, we'll see them in Judge Wren's courtroom and the email will be Exhibit 1 on a screen the size of a wall. Priya nodded once. She stood up. She straightened her jacket. She was gone for 41 minutes. When she came back, she sat down. She put her pen on the table. She looked at Nadia. $2 million, she said, inclusive of attorney's fees, with a settlement agreement that includes a standard non-disparagement clause, no confidentiality restriction on the fact or general nature of the resolution, and this took 20 minutes of the 41, a written representation in the agreement that the company will conduct an internal compensation review of the marketing division within 90 days and provide documentation of that review to a mutually agreed-upon neutral third party. Nadia looked at her. They agreed to the corrective action. They agreed to the corrective action. Nadia sat with this for exactly 5 seconds. Okay, she said. The settlement agreement was signed 6 weeks later, after document review, language negotiation, and the customary process of 2 parties deciding on the precise wording of every phrase in a legal document as though each comma is a small country with its own borders. Priya's firm received its percentage from the settlement fund, which was the arrangement they had established at the beginning. Nadia received, after the firm's share and taxes, which Priya had connected her with an accountant to structure in the most favorable manner available, a sum that was not $2 million, but was relative to the account balance she had maintained through 9 months of litigation on a combination of freelance consulting work she had built back up and careful management of her savings, a different order of magnitude than anything that had previously been true about her financial life. She did not go somewhere warm. She did not buy anything immediately. She paid off her student loans on a Tuesday morning in October, 14 months after the morning she had walked out of Conference Room B into the cold air on South Michigan Avenue. She sat at her kitchen table with her laptop and processed the payment, and then sat still for a while with the radio on low. She thought about the record. 112 entries. The coffee shop, the paint on the woman's wrist, the scratch on the mediation table. She thought about the September email and about Carolyn writing it at 9:47 p.m. on a Thursday, in the casual digital intimacy of someone who trusted that nothing she committed to a screen would ever be read by the woman it concerned. She thought about how long she had known, before she had a word for it, that the room was not built for her, and how that knowledge, rather than diminishing her, had become the most precise instrument she possessed. She closed the laptop. She stood up. She put on her coat and went outside into the October air on the north side, which smelled like rain that hadn't arrived yet, and the particular dry cold of a city preparing for winter. Her phone buzzed. A text from Jem Okoro. "Heard something. Are you okay?" She looked at it for a moment. She typed back, "More than." She put her phone in her pocket and walked north toward the lake, which was making its lake sounds in the middle distance. That low, gray, entirely indifferent roar that has no opinion about what happens on the shore and never has. 3 weeks later, she received a call from a company she had been consulting with during the litigation period. They wanted to know if she was available for a full-time position. Senior Director of Brand Strategy. She would be the first person in that title the company had ever hired. The salary they offered was 32% above the median. She negotiated it up. She said yes on a Wednesday and started on a Monday. And on her first day, she sat in a new office with a window that faced east and a desk that was clean and empty, and she opened a new folder on her personal laptop. She titled it Nothing at All and left it blank and hoped she would never need to fill it. She closed the folder and opened her calendar and looked at what the week held. "Send me the Q1 brief when you have it," she said to no one, because no one was in the room yet, because it was the first day and the room was still learning her shape. Her phone lit up on the desk. An email from Marcus Teal, forwarded through Priya's office. Not to Nadia directly, but to Priya, who had passed it along with no comment. It was from the neutral third party who had been designated to receive the compensation review documentation under the terms of the settlement agreement. The review had been submitted on time. The neutral had certified its receipt. The review, per the settlement terms, was not shared with Nadia. She did not have the right to see its contents. What she had the right to know was that it had occurred, that someone had been required, by a legal agreement that bore Carolyn Voss's company's signature, to look at the numbers, to look at the whole picture. Nadia read Priya's forwarded email. She set the phone face down on the desk. She picked up a pen and wrote at the top of the yellow legal pad she had placed on the desk that morning, Day 1. Then she crossed it out. She wrote, Q1 brief. Request assets by Thursday. She drew a box next to it. The box was empty. She left it that way.